I got to tell you that as we were talking about the seminar series, one of the things we sort of talked about was to look a little bit at the history of the department and give a little bit of a different insight into what's going on. And one of the things that always intrigued me was the flight room over in old Entomology Hall. And you guys have no idea what we're talking about.
Well, some of us do.
Well, some of us do. I didn't want you to tell.
It's a room they couldn't figure. It's a room. Hey, Tom, tell them it's a room they couldn't figure out what else to do with, so they gave it to us to do research in.
Yeah,
right?
And John was instrumental in doing that. But before that, actually, when I got here back in 1971, and 2 or 3 years later, I think it was recommended we were doing research on flight behavior of some of the corn rootworm beetles. I really needed to meet John Barrett, USDA guy over in the Ag and Biological Engineering, we call it now. He reminds me he's never been a Purdue employee. He's always been a USDA guy. But we actually did with Gordy Van Workum, did some work monitoring the flight behavior of the corn rootworm beetles. So that's how I got acquainted with John. But I also got acquainted.
It was basketball, Tom.
It was basketball, that's right. Actually, I used to go over to Lambert Fieldhouse, and John Barrett was playing basketball over there.
He's good. I was never any good.
And he tells lies. You can't believe a thing that that the ag engineers will tell you. But he was part of the basketballers over there, so I've known him all these years. So what we decided to do was we're going to tap into his knowledge about what happened in the light trap research that went on here at Purdue all along the way, and it was close to 20 years you worked somewhat in that area.
Yeah, before we invented computers.
Yeah, back in those days. John, by the way, is an Iowa State graduate, as am I, and John's wife, Liz, back here is a Kansan, as am I. So we get together, and there aren't many Kansans or Iowa Staters, so we kind of compare notes. So, but what I want to do is just kick off real quickly here and then let John kind of comment about things. But when we think about the whole idea of maybe Bill, where are you? Should have used my own stuff.
Now what we're going to talk about, don't look for anything to be right or wrong. And I hope that as diverse as you are, that you can pick up something that will lead to thinking and help you in some way, or at least you can read your email on your smartphone or something other else. But that's all right.
So, from my perspective as an entomologist and teaching the prose and poetry class, this whole idea of like moths to the flame is what we're really talking about in terms of the light trap stuff. And I went back and did a little research for you on this to kind of get us started. It appears the very first device that was used as an attraction to benefit entomologists to insects was this thing. This is a picture of it published in 1911 in Popular Mechanics magazine. Not quite sure how it worked. Had a little drawer down there, I guess. Oh, John, you know.
Now, please be advised that the reason that this came out when it did is because Edison invented electricity, all right? And we ended up with wires to light bulbs. Go ahead.
And so that's what came out. And then, not long after that, 1927, not long in my lifespan at least, or Ricky, the sugar can trap came out. We know as the New Jersey trap. And just about, 2 months ago, Jeff, I found that trap sitting out on the dock. And Jeff is throwing it away. He was throwing away this historical sugar can trap. I mean, this is on eBay. This is worth thousands of dollars, and it was sitting out there on. Now, if you look at the way this trap works, basically, it has a light. Obviously, we're talking about light traps. It has a fan. You can hear that, right? And when the insects are attracted to the light, it's caught with a fan and down into the container at the bottom. So
you said attracted.
Uh-oh, I misspeak.
We don't know whether they're attracted or by default they go to light.
Ooh. Takes an engineer to correct me on this thing.
No, it's just the use of the word.
Oh, okay.
No right, again, Tom, no right, no wrong, all right?
The insects end up at the light somehow.
Yeah, right.
The fan catches them, drags them down into the bottom of the trap.
And we got an incandescent light bulb in there because that's the only kind of light bulb they had at the time.
Oh, so they hadn't...
They couldn't choose.
They couldn't choose. Well, by 1934, the first patent was actually used for a light trap, as we're talking about it here. And also in 1934, I put this in there just for the department head, a guy by the name of William Herms. You've all heard of Herms and his... how many of you read the textbook? Anybody read the Herms book? Only Linda? The rest of you uneducated heathens? Got to read this stuff. It came out of Berkeley, right? It's got to be good stuff. But he actually introduced the electronic version that's the model of the light traps that we use today. I wanted to show you some of the early work that we found. Steve actually found some of this in pictures at Purdue. This was back before John Barrett got here. So we're talking really early ancient history. But Purdue was working on light traps, and these are some of the devices they came up with. And this looked to me like to be a bulb with a pan below it. Is that?
That's right.
Good description. So the insects somehow got to the light, fell down that pan. We probably put something in the bottom of that. Maybe water? Kerosene?
Maybe. I doubt that it was cyanide.
It was. No, it isn't. Watch out for that nowadays. Then we decided somewhere along the way, and back in this is in the 30s, that it would help the traps a little bit by putting a baffle on it. You know, so when they came in there, they would hit that, and then they would get down into the pan that had something, but probably not cyanide in it, and that way we could go and collect them later on. Some of them were really quite fancy looking. I mean, it was in the early research on trying to put some of these together. They kind of used whatever material you had, I guess. And
yeah, the extension, the electricity showed up, and we had the move to use electricity on the farms, and so this is a rubber extension cord because that's all they had, which they ran out of wherever they could get power, and they used whatever light bulb they had. That's enough. Here
it was, and you had a rope hanging in a tree, and as if you were close to the outlet, you had a light trap, right? I don't know if OSHA would necessarily approve the way these things are put up, and I'm not quite sure. Maybe they decided that the baffle was supposed to be see-through to fool the insect. I mean, so they would fly into it like a screen and get down there, but I don't know how this worked out. But they did take it out to the field at some point. They decided that not only do we want the insect to get into the trap, but let's see if we can use it somehow in pest management, Ricky. So they took it out the field and hung it up in the field along with the apple trees or whatever to capture the insects and keep them from laying their eggs on the apples. And I don't know how that worked out technically, but it made for some interesting pictures. You know, lots of trees with lots of lights on cables and everything hanging out over those trees, and you know, you had to check them later on to see what kind of insects were showing up there. Who knows what he's got?
Now, just to put this in perspective in time, this is when entomologists were keeping field notes, all right? And they kept immaculate field notes. And they hired good secretaries to transpose their field notes. They didn't have enough money to pay for phone calls. The only way they really communicated among each other, and they sometimes talked to ag engineers, the only way they communicated with each other was just to put it in perspective, they wrote letters and met at North Central branch meetings and talked with each other. And you didn't have instant communication, much less instant gratification.
In fact, when I got here, George Gould actually handed me my startup package. For those of you who haven't heard that, he handed me an old bag, a flour bag, and it had 4 unused insect nets in it, and a pith helmet, and his field notes. Not all of his field notes, but the notes where he had collected insects of some relevance to coal. And so I had a little notebook in there. That was my startup package.
They were unused nets?
They were unused. They were brand new nets. So, and then I didn't even have a real sweep net to use them with. I just had the net part that he had in the bag. So,
but you had to have instructions on how to swing that net.
Yeah, exactly. That was that was it. Well, at nighttime it made quite a sight out in these fields. Now, whether we were collecting any insects and doing any good or not, but the neighbors were talking about the research. I'll tell you what was going on when they went down the road and they would see the field all lit up like this. So maybe it's a confusion technique. I mean, those insects were trying to decide where the apple trees were out there, you know, those night-flying creatures. So that, well, I can imagine neighbors going down the road probably talked about all the research Purdue was doing in those days, hanging these traps out on poles and not even any apple trees around. I don't know what they were doing there, John. That was, maybe they're just practicing. John saw this one earlier, and John has a theory. Only engineers have a theory about this, but obviously there are several traps on this.
Now, can you imagine crawling up a ladder to dump those the catch out? Now, irrespective of what the catch meant. Okay, the one thing that you knew when you ran a light trap is that if you got one insect in there, there was one insect of that type that was in the area. Now, relating it to anything else was interesting. But see, they had a wagon wheel. Now, this is my imagination. And so they used the wagon wheel so they could turn it so they didn't have to climb their ladder but one time to service all the traps. Oh, well.
Pretty ingenious, right? That's, well, who knows? But the wagon didn't go so well after
No.
that. Then, oh, yeah. Come on, tell us.
Howard Day. I was hired to come from the University of Tennessee to work with in ag engineering with H.O. Day. Now, Howard was a slave driver. He endured we engineers. He liked us because after the electrification, farm electrification setup started to produce fertilizer out of mussel shoals so we could raise get more produce, more crops. There was Howard and a man named Bill Parvis and True Hinton were here at Purdue looking and trying to get electricity used on farms. Now, this was at a time that we didn't have electricity on farms. So one of the things they got into was putting electric motors on washing machines. Now, you could have gone a long time without knowing this, all right? And as a sidelight to that, they went out and True, using money out of the Indiana Electric Association, which was the money that rebuilt the flight chamber. All right, I spent the rest of it on that. But True was hell-bent to study insect attractants and work with entomology and to relate develop survey traps and study traps for control. Now, Howard was interesting because one of his comments was the only thing he knew for sure, like I just said, the only thing he knew for sure when you caught an insect in a trap was that there was one insect in the area and it was in that trap, and that you could be sure of. Now, Howard was this was up in at Plymouth, Indiana, working with H.J. Heinz companies studying the transmission of bacterial cucurbit wilt in the field. That was before we found out that Heinz planted 2 or 3 times more cucumbers than they needed, and they really didn't need insect control, but that's beside the point. But Howard, when John Osmond hated to use cyanide, and John would not be in a field around cyanide when you were putting cyanide in these insect traps. Now, Howard would smoke his cigarette, and he ended up smoking himself to death. All right, but he would use his cigarette to tell which way the wind was blowing, and then he would dump the cyanide in the sack from upwind. Okay, now you see, we worked together on all of this, and the happiest. I mean, to see the delight on the man's face when he found the sexta and the quincamaculator. How do you pronounce it? Hell, I've been out of that so long now. The hornworms. He would take a fifth instar and just throw it down the ground just as hard as he could to see it squish. Okay.
But this is Howard.
This is Howard.
The hornworm squisher, they used to call him, right? So, well, this Howard was the person who worked with John on this, and one of the things you did was this.
From an educational standpoint, one of the things I did is I worked with General Electric. When we were, now recognize that light is visually, human vision interpreted, the word light. And remember that light bulbs get lighted and people get lit, and Howard would say that over and over to me. Now, if you go from red to yellow, up to the spectrum, over to black light, to BLB, to germicidal, these are all 15 watts. All right, humans see the most in this area. Insects respond according to this line down here, which brings them into this angstrom area here. And this is what we showed at the State Fair once to explain what it was, how the different fluorescent bulbs attracted, I use the word attracted. Okay.
It says it right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
He used it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But that's enough education for the moment.
Well, I've got to tell you, though, that those graduate cylinders lasted for years, because when we cleaned out the attic of Entomology Hall prior to moving to Smith Hall, they were all over there, still had the moths in them at the levels at which John put them in there to demonstrate at the State Fair. A little bit lower because the domestic beetles had gotten in there over the years, but you still had these graduate cylinders with those, and I kept wondering what they were, and then eventually we found this this slide, and that was used as a demo at the State Fair. So, what year was that? What year was that, John? When the State Fair, when you went down there?
I don't remember.
It was the year we moved to Smith Halls when I found them in the top of.
Must have been 80.
So
I'm guessing. I can go look it up in a publication.
May have been earlier than that. I don't remember.
May have been earlier than that.
I was going to State Fair in those days, but it was some years ago.
Okay, one of the works that I got involved with here was when now Howard regressed. Howard was interested in studying the European corn borer, and he followed it from its initial infestation in the U.S. as it progressed, and was looking for it to breed itself out of existence. And I don't think it's the problem that it was, but the cereal leaf beetle. Cereal leaf beetle got dumped in a load of trash off of a ship on Lake Michigan and floated to shore in Michigan. Okay, and grew, and we were called in because we thought the cereal leaf beetle was going to destroy all wheat production. Okay, we took large airplanes and tried to spray Michigan in the south part of it. It had very little effect on the cereal leaf beetle, but the cereal leaf beetle did not progress because it stopped as it could not get the last life cycle that it needed to move into Indiana any better. But this is an Alisco trap with a skirt on it, which is in the ground. And it's cold up there in Michigan, and it was hard to see cereal leaf beetles and follow them, but we could trap cereal leaf beetles and find their presence in abundance. Go ahead, Don.
So you were burying these traps?
They were burying them 3 or 4 feet in the ground. Okay.
Now these are the traps we use nowadays.
This is what's called, the Entomology Society has a standard survey trap, and the baffles and the light and the trap that you can't see but will see in a minute is a standard survey trap.
So they were buried for cereal leaf beetle stuff.
Okay, this is a standard survey trap that we used. Now, I never developed the ability to count insects. I could not sit. I hired people to do that. We didn't know what time of night insects flew into the traps and were caught in the traps. So I built a divided catch trap, divided into 12 increments with a quart bottles under it. This is brilliant, all right? And put this down on here so that we could get a timed representation of when the insects were flying. We had not gotten around to bringing environmental factors into it yet. We didn't have computers that would do that.
Actually, when we got to the flight room, they had some of those set up over in
Yes.
place, I remember.
Yes.
They rotate the jar underneath so you didn't have to go out every hour and take the sample off of there. So that,
Okay, Howard studied vegetable insect control out in what we used to call the black and whites, where the married Second World War couples lived, and they tore that down, and we put Howard planted vegetable crops out there. We went out and I developed these traps, 5 lamps, no baffles, caught a lot of insects, had a fan in it. The base of it had cyanide and a drain down there, and this caught a lot of insects. Now, we also use this trap to control insects. Now, this is similar. They're similar in the top, but there's diesel fuel in the bottom. Now, cleaning out that diesel fuel was fun when it was full of bugs. That was interesting. Okay. I got involved with, we didn't get Ralph in yet with insect-free lighting, but I got involved with what was called insect-free lighting. This was a time when we were interested in the entomology and ag engineering departments working together with USDA, became interested in studying how to reduce insect populations around anywhere outside that you wanted to reduce them. So we had dusk to dawn lights that were being sold, and these are mercury vapors. So and some of them sodium vapors. And out there where the baseball field is now and where the tennis courts are, we had this row of 10 200 feet spaced apart electrocuted grids. These things were 4 by 8 feet, all right, with dusk to dawn lamps on the top of them, and they would arc and burn clean. We had this. I had this set up on. Took weather data and studied reducing insect populations in lighted areas. Now, got in a little problem there because Purdue Airport was busy at the time, and the pilots thought this was a new runway. Go ahead, Don.
Is your grid there a old bed frame?
No.
Box grid?
No, it looks like one, but it's made by a company called Insecta Cuter, and they you can look. That's still on the internet if you want to look it up.
Exactly. So,
now this
John obviously didn't collect all the insects himself. I don't think this is John.
No, that's Don Cyphers. Don Cyphers came to work for me as a sophomore, and he was going to become a marine biologist. Okay, Don owned the land that is presently and sold the land that was under University Place out there. He inherited that. He decided not to become a marine biologist and went to California and got in the .com business. And it was about 3 years ago he gave $2.5 million to Purdue for a grant.
And here's where he got his start.
Here's where he got his start.
You know,
he brought his.
Have approved this. Look, remember how tall those poles were? That's standing up on a ladder.
There's a 16-foot ladder right here.
That drove him to the .com business.
That drove him to the .com business. Yeah. Okay. This shows these poles folded down for servicing, and this shows a sodium vapor lamp, which people didn't like because of the color of them. Now recognize that red does not attract as much as the yellow in the spectrum. But we can't use red lights for insect-free lighting.
We can't see anything. But
no, but they've got
another connotation.
They got another connotation.
I think so.
And one thing under that out there, the corn that's planted on this, and it was under study quite a bit because it had been about 100 years in continuous corn in that area. But now it's growing baseballs.
Now it's growing, yeah, baseball diamond out there. So
This is some farmer's installation.
this farmer put this up?
Yeah, it's not, that's,
So some of your research was being implemented out there.
some of it was. That's one I got involved with. Another one I got involved with was, and Osmond thought this was interesting. Alcoa was getting complaints from people who in the frozen food industry because they were eating into their frozen food and finding moths embossed on the bottom of them, of the rolled out aluminum. So I went down to Vincennes, to that plant, walked in, same thing. I mean, they had lights on over their rolling mill, where they were rolling out the aluminum. So they shut the lights off and solved their problem. It's the little things.
Ralph got his master's in 58, his PhD in 61.
61.
61.
Oh, that's what.
Bill Butt was his advisor.
Oh, great. It was early.
I never knew him, so I'm sure
I knew him
he worked
briefly.
in the 70s, so
Yeah.
worked with Bill Butt then.
Oh,
I just wonder what's going on here, John. You know,
well, some people will do anything to have fun, and I like that art because I could imagine what happened when an insect would hit onto that. We've got one of those things right here. Oh, this is a. Oh, you may be able to hear it. It turned out that these electrocuted grids would give you an incident that you could record. Whenever they fired, it would indicate that an insect had hit them. So this is what we started using early on in the free flight chamber. We'd catch insects, bring them in, release them, grow them, release them, and then record the event of their striking the grid. Now the difficulty with the free flight chamber there was cleaning up the place after you, yeah, go ahead, excuse me.
well, I was going to say that that sound that you heard John demonstrating over there, we have a neighbor out to our place, south of our place, leaves his grid on all year long because he wants to get the first one. I mean, he's even got it on at Christmas time. I mean, it's out there. But I was sitting at his place some years ago. We were sitting there, and a big moth, I never did see quite what it was, got in there, and it snapped, crackled, and popped. And he's sitting in the swing going, hot damn, got another one.
Well,
so he was using the sound to indicate his desire to kill insects. So,
Howard Day's comment about that was the best thing you can do to make your yard free of insects is buy your neighbor one of these grid traps and help him install it as far away from your house as you could get. Yeah.
Oh, well, so we wanted to spend a little time about the flight room, and there are very few pictures of the flight room. John did have a couple in there, and as I remember when we moved here, this was kind of at the front of what was, and tell us about what happened at that.
Well, realize that there weren't any digital computers then. We didn't have memory, and we didn't have any way to compute for computerized control of temperature and humidity. And the free flight chamber was, as it was called at the time, was deemed unsafe for humans to be in it because it was falling, it was sinking, the foundation was giving way. All right.
It was a large lecture room.
It was a large lecture room, and it seemed like it was about 20 wide by 40 long, and so I took it. And I couldn't control temperature and humidity as you can today. Now, when I say, I'm talking about vapor pressure deficit, not just simply relative humidity. And to supply something that was, the environment was a mimic of what an insect found itself in, without having a computer, and we had an analog computer over in Ag Engineering, which I could get and use. All right? In order to get that thing so that it the signals were clean enough to use, I bought 1,600 feet of multi-paired twisted insulated cable and got physical plant to run a solid line from that underground all the way over and bring it up in the computer room in ag engineering. That was necessary in order.
This was it?
No, that's what came. Oh, this is, yeah, this is in ag engineering.
So,
now, one thing I never determined was at 11:42 each morning, 5 days a week, there was a mysterious surge would go through that system and would knock everything out. And I could not program. We tried every way possible to find out what motor, what refrigeration was coming on, what was going on, and I never found it. So I shut the damn thing down at about 3 or 4 minutes before that 11:42, and started it up 3 or 4 minutes after 11:42, and just had to void that from the data set. Excuse me. Go ahead. That's in ag engineering.
well, after John and we talked about all this, I tried to find out for sure what happened afterwards, because research that you guys tried to do in there, you said there were a couple things you tried to work on, right?
Well, the problem when you're in an area like that is getting a source of insects that are pure enough to use and raising them. That's the pain, is raising them and then delivering them and then studying what goes on. And this is a 7-day-a-week job, and I didn't have any interest. I mean,
so while the intent of that was to do some validation of light trap catches and things.
well, to study insect flight patterns and response times and just anything that you could.
So when I got here, it pretty much in 1971, they weren't using it for much of anything, and Gary Bennett and his crew took over to use it as a halfway temperature controlled large environment. They set up mock kitchens in there, and this is actually Kathy Heinsohn, who was doing cockroach mating behavior because they had to work in the dark to do some of that stuff. So they did there were about 5 or 6 or 7 different students here in the 70s that were doing research using that primarily in the urban area as just a semi-controlled environment. We actually did some stuff in there with moth flight on oviposition behavior. Mylan Bushing was working on black cutworm moth flight. We had the plants in flats out there, release the moths at night, change the day or the moonlight activity to see how that would impact their behavior. So this is Kathy sitting in the dark doing her research. I think one of the students, Schneider, I believe, emailed me and he said, well, we not only did research there, we cooked breakfast in there. We actually had a nice stove and things in our kitchen, and it was, who was it? One of the, I can't remember the student that worked over there was cooking breakfast, but they used it, they had cockroach activity circles and things in there. They were just basically using the space. And this Kathy here was looking at, she said it's X-rated, but you'll have to tell them because she's actually watching cockroaches mate in the dark. So she said we were sitting over in the flight room, watching what was the flight room, watching them mate. So that, well, obviously it never got used for what it was really intended to do in terms of real potential, I guess. But John built it with the excess money, and we actually at one point had a basketball goal set up in there. That worked pretty well. There were lots of uses, cooking breakfast and whatever. So that, well, this reminds me as we get down here to the time to go to some questions. One of Archie the Cockroach's little poems is about the moth, and he asks the question that John says we don't know the answer to. He says, "Why do you fellows pull this stunt?" He said, "If that had been an uncovered candle instead of an electric light bulb, you would now be a small, unsightly cinder." And the answer to that from the moth is that we desire pleasure and so forth in life, and so we wad it all up into one little wad, and then we spend it. It's better to live a short time and be happy than to live a long time and be bored all the while. So the moths go to the flame for that reason, according to Archie the Cockroach.
Going to the next part.
They didn't want to hear that.
Okay. They want to hear that. Bob Galoon got involved. This is a weather station that I brought in from Australia, which did not record like temperature and humidity. It recorded incrementally a change in temperature and humidity. And this was when I had to take my own weather data because there wasn't any weather data that was being taken anywhere. But this is Bob, and we were in the process of collecting data to use in, I had left this prior type of work and had gone into artificial intelligence and the developments of the mimic and simulation of insect population and corn growth and development and soybean growth and development. Go ahead.
That's of course you recognize that. This I had to put one insect in there. But this is what John ended up doing.
Okay. In order to, you have to have a time base for simulating insect population growth and development. And that isn't easy. In the first place, think of observing first instar, second instar, time of mating, relate that. You can't relate it to chronological time. You end up relating it to physiological time in some manner or other. But this is a page of output from a Hessian fly simulation that I did with John Foster and Bob Galoon. But just the next evolution in what I did, working with Purdue and working with entomology, had to do with simulating insect population growth and development. What's next? Oh. People tend to fall in love with whatever they're doing, and this is what I closed a lot of my presentation with. Okay?
Oh, I thought you were going to say something about
No.
that. Oh, that's it. This is advice to the masses.
No, just for what it's worth.
Oh, for what it's worth. So that you were going to say something about Howard Day and the corn borer in closing here.
Oh, this was the Ent Society's survey trap. Right here.
We've got a batch of those in the attic over in Smith Hall right now.
Lisco made those and sold them through the co-op. And well, you know, they were throughout the state and they were mailed in. I don't know whether anybody ever.
Where's Larry? We're still doing it, aren't we?
Okay. Trap in a cornfield. Howard pursuing the European corn borer.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.